I think there's a bit of a change in the air lately, you know. Something's different. I'm noticing something feels different. And in a good way. In a good way. For pretty much my whole life, I've been a progressive. As a general disposition, and I find that the ideas of progress make a lot of sense to me. And so I think because of that, I've always been a bit jaded about United States politics. And I think there's good reason for that, because I think for so many years it's just seemed like the Democratic Party has been so irresponsible in two different senses, being a prodigal, we could say, but also being irresponsive, being not responsive to the mood of the country, and seeming to be very out of touch with the reality on the ground. It's a little bit difficult to describe exactly what I mean by this, but it goes deeper than just the political establishment. It also goes to all of the television media and even print journalism, which I, of course, have less exposure to because I'm not a big fan of news. But it extends to all of that. It extends to the whole kind of cultural machine of modern liberal America. Modern liberal America that is trying to appeal to the millennial age group. People born in the 80s and 90s, mostly. There has been this just remarkably shallow, superficial, kind of immature quality, I think, to the rhetoric, the presentation, the humor, and all of that. I have been embarrassed by the liberal faction of American politics for years now. I've found them cringeworthy, embarrassing, irritating, out of touch, and like I said, irresponsible. But ever since Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race a few months ago, that has been starting to change for me. And I think for the first time in my life, I feel like things are actually starting to lighten up a bit, and I'm starting to feel a little bit better about the state of politics in this country, which is incredible to me, because it's just forever it seemed like things keep getting worse. They just will only get worse and worse and worse and worse. But now I actually kind of have something that I haven't had in a really long time, which is hope. And of course, for this generation, hope should be a word that, well, brings one particular man to mind. It should be a word that doesn't exactly fill us with confidence perhaps. Because, of course, that was the slogan of President Obama on his campaign trail in 2008. I think the last time I felt this kind of excitement about politics was in 2008 with Obama. Because I was definitely a fan of Obama back then, even though I was only 9 years old. Obama, there was a thing about him, he could connect with everybody. He could even connect with 9-year-olds. There was such a big difference between Obama and George W. Bush. George W. Bush was just a very clearly retarded man. There was something that just wasn't quite there with his brain. And that made him kind of a likable, affable doofus. I even, thinking about George W. Bush, I can't help but love the guy. And I think that's probably what carried him so far in life, besides just nepotism. Because, really, I learned a lot about George W. Bush actually quite recently. And the more I learn about George W. Bush, the less respect I have for him. And I didn't really start out with a whole lot of respect for the man to begin with. But it's very obvious to me that he was a nepotism baby who had no talent for anything except for maybe just being a likable doofus. And had no message. Very shallow, very superficial, very well, I would say career-oriented, but he wasn't. He was a fail son. He sucked at every job he ever had, and he was terrible in school. He had no qualifications. He should never have been elected president. And then here comes Obama, and he's this very well put together, very eloquent, smart man, very good at debating, very good at public speaking, very good at electrifying people to his side. And yeah, we all kind of fell under the Obama spell, and it was quite magical. But of course, Obama drew in the progressive vote because I think he probably marketed himself as more of a progressive than he actually was. I think Obama probably fundamentally more agreed with the Bill Clinton kind of approach to politics. I guess it was called third way back then, the Tony Blair approach. That was more his speed. But he kind of marketed himself as, oh, I'm something big, new, and different. And I guess in comparison to the Bush administration, it was still a big fucking breath of fresh air. But it was, it filled our lungs, but I guess the air wasn't quite as fresh as people had hoped. Maybe it was a bit more stale and turgid. And this is really the progressive perspective that I'm reporting here. Progressives tended to be a little bit disappointed with Obama. One of Obama's big stated goals was to change the whole state of affairs with the military in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, he didn't end up pulling out of Afghanistan. That wouldn't happen until Joe Biden was president. But he did pull most of the troops out of Iraq, which I guess was a good thing. But then he also, he got the U.S. involved in a lot of foreign conflicts that it wasn't involved in under the Bush administration through kind of indirect means like drones and whatnot. And That I think upset a lot of progressives, because progressives tend to be quite non-interventionist, and for good reason. I think the less you try to forcefully insert the interests, or forcefully assert, I guess, the interests of the United States in other countries, probably the better. I don't think it creates goodwill among foreign countries to constantly feel like they're being pushed around by someone who's bigger than them. And that's really been the approach of the United States ever since World War II. And I think Eisenhower knew that that was an issue, but it was never really addressed. And it's only kind of gotten worse since then. And so progressives really, I think, want to turn the clock back on that. That's one way in which maybe progressives are, if anything, a bit regressive, wanting to go back to the more isolationist policy of the United States before World War II. But it doesn't seem like Obama was really all that interested in pursuing that as a holistic foreign policy. Maybe, pulling on the ground troops out of countries, sure. But, getting involved in wars, putting America into foreign conflicts, that seemed to be something he was very comfortable with doing. And there was no effort to close Guantanamo Bay. One of the big things was he wanted to create a public option for a healthcare plan. That was something I remember my dad being interested in. And, he, won a supermajority, didn't he, in Congress that first election. Didn't do anything with it. It was just like, you have all the advantages. You have all the you have all the pieces at play, and you choose not to use them. I think that felt like a big betrayal to a lot of the left-wing voters, the people who believed in what Obama sold them, the bill of goods that Obama sold him. It just doesn't seem like he was committed in the way that people maybe thought he would be. And that has produced a lot of resentment from the left toward Obama and the whole Democratic establishment that he represents. And I think it was a big kind of trauma, I think, for the left that they still haven't healed from, is that feeling of betrayal. And I've always been, I guess, sympathetic to that, because I've always felt that the beliefs and the positions of the left resonate the most with me, and they seem the most reasonable and the most authentic and compassionate. And of course there's also trade. Now trade is kind of a big controversial issue. People have different perspectives on trade. I'm not personally, I don't have I've not decided on what to think about it. But much like Bill Clinton, Obama is a neoliberal, and so the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a very important part of his legacy. Maybe some people liked it. It seems like the majority of people didn't. It seems like it was actually a quite unpopular deal, and a deal that people felt angry that they didn't really have any real say in. That this deal was just kind of signed between these countries, and it's like, oops, I guess now we we don't have the protections that we used to have for industry. And this is something that Donald Trump was able to exploit very effectively, because Donald Trump actually used to be a quite clever politician. He's a fucking retard now, but 8 years ago, if you go back and look at Trump from 8 years ago, I mean, and this is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, there's a huge difference. But yeah, the 2012 election, A lot of people were disappointed in Obama for that first term. But of course, Mitt Romney was just so clearly, so clearly worse than Obama in pretty much every respect that it was a no-brainer, Obama. And it seems that that's generally what the country decided. Obama did win that second term, and Mitt Romney was quite graceful about it. And that was kind of the last time we had a graceful presidential election because, of course, who ruined that? Donald Trump. But here's the thing about Donald Trump. It always really frustrated me how the liberal media treated Donald Trump in 2015 and 2016 and beyond, and during his presidency. That whole era, I found myself just utterly frustrated by the liberals. And I kind of thought that it was the liberals' fault for creating Donald Trump. Because I'll tell you what, I used to like Donald Trump in the same way that I still like George W. Bush. Because I think you can look at these people and say, well, okay, I would never vote for a Donald Trump. But I see qualities in him, and I saw qualities in him back then that I found very likable and kind of refreshing and entertaining and enjoyable. I enjoyed the way he disrupted the conversation. I remember when he first announced that he was running for president in 2015. This is after his 2000 run, which I believe was in Ross Perot's party, if I'm not mistaken. But I remember when Donald Trump announced his run, and he was in Trump Tower going down the escalator, and he did that speech about how we're gonna build a wall and the immigrants and whatnot. And he just seemed like a total goof off. He seemed totally ridiculous. And it wasn't clear if he actually wanted to be president at this time. It kind of seemed like this might have just been a publicity stunt to promote his TV show. People didn't really take it seriously at first, and I certainly didn't. But then it was actually quite surprising when it got to the GOP debates, because Donald Trump was absolutely dominating those debates, kind of unexpectedly. He just came in like a bull in a china shop and just tore everyone to pieces, just so artfully. And so classlessly as well, which was interesting because, you know, someone like an Obama could maybe do that, but he would do it with class. But that same kind of artful, surgical precision Donald Trump employed, but he did it with no class whatsoever. He was a total boor. And there was something just so charming about that, I think, because to me it just exposed what the GOP had always been about. That this is really the heart and soul of the GOP, is this pig-faced buffoon making an ass out of himself and everyone else in the room. And it was great to me. I think he made a mockery of the GOP in a way that made me kind of fall in love with him. Because I felt that he was exposing really just how silly and how contemptible the whole party was. And he was attacking the old party standards. He was attacking Ted Cruz, most especially. But you know, everyone on that stage, even Rand Paul, got his licks from Donald Trump in those debates. And Trump was an excellent comedian back then. He sucks now. He's not funny at all anymore. But back then he was actually funny, and he had charisma, and he could dunk on people so well. And God, few things are more satisfying than watching this guy, who was really just like a New York liberal who came in from Manhattan. Really didn't have any business being there, wasn't even a politician. And he just comes in and makes a mockery of everyone and trounces them, beats them in all of the primaries, and leaves them all looking like the Sneetches at the end of that book, you know, just pathetic. Like, what the fuck were we even doing this whole time? We had no idea what we were dealing with. And there was just something astonishing about that. And I think in the same way that that appealed to me as a progressive, it could also appeal to a lot of conservatives who genuinely kind of fell for the Trump trap. But, you know, as obvious as it was that Trump was a con man back then, and it was obvious, and as obvious as it was that he was, you know, a classless, principleless moron, when it came to some things. I think he had a certain intelligence when it came to appeal. And in that sense, I consider Trump probably one of the greatest savant stories in history, because the guy, I think, was quite stupid in a lot of respects, but very shockingly intelligent when it came to marketing himself. But to the people who could be won over by that, he was actually convincing. But it wasn't even just conservatives. It was also people who were not wedded to one side or the other, but had actual real world concerns that Trump was promising to address in a way that the Democrats didn't seem to. These days, Donald Trump these days Donald Trump is like a totally far-right lunatic. But it wasn't like that back then. It's actually, people forget how liberal Trump was in certain respects, or how actually genuinely populist he was in certain respects. Not genuinely, but disingenuously. The rhetoric was populist. These days, Donald Trump will say that giving everyone health care is a bad thing. He'll say that, the Democrats want to give people health care. Isn't that a horrible thing? Which to me is very out of touch. I think that's a totally off-base mistake, a total miscalculation for him. Because he's going nuts. Like, his brain is turning into sludge. He's getting old. He's Bidening. He's losing his ability to actually kind of rationally interpret what's going to be good for him from a marketing perspective. Back in 2016, he was saying that he wanted universal health care. He wanted to give people health care back in 2016. I swear to fucking Christ, he said this. Another big deal was, of course, we were just talking about Obama and the TPP. And of course, the person he was running against was Hillary Clinton, whose husband was responsible for NAFTA. Another big free trade agreement. Very unpopular agreements, especially with one class of people, the people living in the Rust Belt states, big manufacturing zone of America, whose jobs were affected, whose long-term financial outlook and stability were actually seemingly affected by these free trade deals in a negative way. And Trump actually had enough intelligence and enough just like social awareness to pick up on that and to make that a part of his agenda. And so he became this sort of nationalist figure, this economic nationalist, wanting to basically, and it was a good part, a part of his sort of brand that he's the businessman. And that was how he sold everything back then, was I'm a business. He didn't notice he doesn't do that shit anymore. He's totally lost the plot. He forgot what made him appealing in the first place. Back then, the appeal of Donald Trump was that he was a businessman who wanted to get the best deals for the United States. And he looked at these free trade deals and he said, these are bad deals, we're getting gypped. I want to make better deals. I wouldn't have done this, we're losing money on this. We can do better. And that was the whole thing with Mexico too. It's become this weird kind of religious thing, I think, for Trump, the whole border, that he has to make Democrats into satanic perverts who want to bring over illegal criminals from across the border. It wasn't as charged in that hyper irrational way back then. He wasn't quite as much of a baby about it back then as he is now. Back then, a lot of it actually was very fiscal and very just practical. And so he would say, look, these countries like China and Mexico, they're ripping us off. We have these deals with them that we are getting the short end of the stick on. And what are these politicians doing? They don't know how to run a country. They're incompetent. It wasn't even like he was saying there was malice behind it. These days, it's all about the malice. He's cranking up the moral outrage, like he's fucking Rush Limbaugh or something. It's crazy how much he has turned into not just a bog standard Republican, but like your crazy paranoid grandpa Republican. He just wasn't like that before. I swear, he was different. There was something fresh about him back then. And a big part of it was that businessman shtick of his, that we're getting the raw end of the deal. I want to give us better deals. And so it felt a lot less vindictive and mean-spirited back then. And so that was what we had going on the Republican side. We had this sort of weird kind of meeting between this sort of like halfway. He was defended Planned Parenthood back then too. Like these days, he's like talking some crazy ass shit about abortion, saying like abortion, you can kill a baby after it was born. That was something he said in the last debate. Like total fucking lunatic grandpa, oatmeal brain shit. Back then, he actually defended Planned Parenthood from Ted Cruz. And you know, he didn't offend the abortion part of Planned Parenthood, but he was defending Planned Parenthood. Like, guys, he had an edge to him. He did go against the grain. He wasn't just like any other Republican back then. He was a little bit more liberal in certain respects. He was a bit more populist in certain respects. He was more nationalist in certain respects. And he was just different. But he had that, and then he combined that with that great kind of stand-up comedian aspect of his persona. That he, you know, like George W. Bush, was able to be this kind of lovable doofus. Or another good example is Boris Johnson in the UK. That man is very calculated, and he knows how to craft this image of him as kind of a silly man, but a man who you look at and think, well, he's just so gosh darn likable. I can't help but find myself enjoying watching him, and that gives him a lot of his political capital, is that kind of lovable entertainment factor. Like there was a clip of Boris Johnson talking on some radio show, and he said, have you ever tried a vegan sausage? And And you could tell in that little moment before he said vegan, he was thinking, what would be the funniest way for me to say the word vegan? Because he knows that's not how you pronounce vegan. But that's the thing, is he's good at that. He's good at coming up with those little things that he can do that just make him a little bit unique and a little bit funny and charming in a kind of bumbling, humble way. Of course, humble is not the word that comes to mind when you think of Donald Trump, but he kind of worked it in reverse. He had this braggadocious kind of entertainer persona that he had crafted over the last 50 years. And it worked, and people knew it, and it suckered a lot of people in. Meeting that kind of refreshing nationalist approach with this over here, which is just the boorish lack of politeness and lack of respect for the establishment. That was Trump's appeal in 2016. But then you look at what was happening on the Democratic side, and it is no wonder why they lost in that year, because nobody ran. I remember it was so creepy. It was genuinely disturbing to me what was going on with the Democrats, because I remember back when I was in high school, because I left high school before that whole election season began. Back when I was in high school, people were talking about Hillary Clinton being the next nominee as if it was a preordained conclusion. As if, oh yeah, we don't even need to have a primary to decide this. That, oh yeah, it's just Hillary, she's the obvious pick. What? The fuck are you talking about? Like, why is Hillary the obvious pick? Tell me, why? Why do we need to all rally behind her? What about her makes her so fucking special? But that's how it was. People were just talking, normal people were talking about like this. And I just remember thinking, are you guys out of your fucking minds? Like, you're just willing to give up on the democratic process already and just preordain this bitch, the president? It was actually kind of infuriating. And so I immediately had this kind of distaste for Hillary Clinton because of that. I was like, this woman doesn't get to just stroll in and demand to be president. But that seemed to be what happened, because nobody fucking ran against her except for Bernie Sanders. I was the only motherfucker who actually did. Of course, there were those 3 other guys in that first debate, but nobody cared about them. What, Lincoln Chafee, fucking Glass-Steagall, crybaby. Yeah, nobody cared about those motherfuckers. It was the preordained candidate, the one who all the super delegates voted for, and then the guy who actually fucking cared. The guy who actually had something to say, had a unique message, who wanted to actually live up to the expectations that his camp put on Obama, Bernie Sanders. And so I had much more sympathy for Bernie Sanders than I did for Hillary Clinton in that campaign. And I did resonate with his sort of statistician side of him, how he's very policy focused. Maybe he was a little bit too much of a statistician. Maybe he should have been a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more well-rounded. I certainly don't think he was perfect, but he definitely, he was definitely a lot more likable and interesting, and had a lot more potential, I think, than Clinton did. But because it was a foreordained conclusion, you know, he had no chance. It was just never going to happen that year. But then he tried again. But Hillary Clinton was just a thoroughly unlikable person. There's just something about her that just makes you hate her, you know? And people like to blame sexism for that. People like to blame, oh yeah, it's because she's a woman, and, you know, she's a woman who's not afraid to act like a man. No, she's a woman who's not afraid to act like a fucking asshole. That's what she is. You know? Because men, you know, men have been able to get away with that and still get places. But yeah, I don't think that's really what we want to be encouraging. I don't think we want to be encouraging people to just be these sort of brash, power-hungry, unscrupulous, just frankly arrogant people. Like the whole, it's like she thought that there was no chance that she was going to lose, and the whole Democratic establishment and the whole liberal media was saying that at the time, and it struck me as very remarkably out of touch, because again, like all those ways that Donald Trump was able to appeal to people, it's just like they thought there's no way that this guy could con the American people. Why? The American people are fucking idiots. Everyone knows this. It should not have been a surprise that they fell for that scam. There was just this smug air of superiority and elitism about everyone. And God, the fucking late night talk show hosts like Colbert. God, Colbert just became a totally just unwatchable show once he moved to CBS. Colbert hated Colbert during that whole period, the whole Trump era. You know, all those people, you know, and you know, I don't hate all of them. Like Trevor Noah was okay, John Oliver was okay, but they all got really political because Colbert brought his politics over from Comedy Central to CBS, and then he got great ratings for that. He was really popular, and then everyone else started to jump on that bandwagon, like Seth Meyers and all those guys. But they just had this kind of smugness and this comfort about them. Like, yeah, we're the establishment and we don't need to worry about anything, and we got it in the bag, and this Trump guy is a loser and who fucking cares. And it felt disrespectful, I think. It felt disrespectful to the people who were duped, to the people who were conned by Trump. And I think it bred a lot more resentment toward the liberal establishment from those people, and thus made Trump more popular. And meanwhile, nobody cared about Bernie Sanders. Like, nobody was talking about this guy who was actually offering some unique solutions, who actually seemed policy focused. Nobody cared. There was no coverage of him. He wasn't getting any press, and it just felt like the priorities were so on backwards for these people. It's like they just wanted to rest on their laurels and not even try. And if anything, it actually got worse in 2020 because Bernie Sanders was a bigger threat, I think, to them in 2020, because they didn't just have this preordained candidate in Hillary, and so they actually had to work a little bit harder. And they did some very clever things, actually. But with Bernie Sanders, oh my God, people don't realize, I think, how much the media, the liberal media, was attacking Bernie Sanders at that time. They did not want a progressive president. They did shady shit. A lot of people don't remember this or never saw it, never noticed it when it was happening, but CNN, they would Photoshop liver spots, like big old liver spots on his forehead. They would crank up the red balance on pictures of him to make it look like he had a flush red face, like he had some sort of a heart condition. They would do things to make him look more old and sickly and feeble than he actually was. They would do these very subtle kind of manipulation tactics, and they would go unnoticed by a lot of people. But they fucking pissed me off so much with that shit. It was rigged. It was the whole establishment was rigged against Bernie Sanders. They did not want him to be president, and that just that really I found just immensely frustrating. You know, as someone who related a lot more to Bernie Sanders than to any other candidate. Just the lies, the fucking lies, like Nancy Pelosi. I hated that cunt for a while, because, like, I remember someone asked her at a town hall, what do you think of Medicare for All? And she just fucking lied about it. She said that, oh, Medicare, it's not good because Medicare, you know, doesn't have catastrophic plans. We're not talking about Medicare. We're talking about a completely different system. We're talking about free healthcare for every single goddamn American. There's no such thing as a catastrophic plan. It's free. But they would lie like this. And they were all doing this. These Democrats, they were pissing me off so much. I just became so fed up with the Democrats during that election cycle. Although I did respect a bit of the grift when it came to the Biden campaign, because he did something really clever, really sneaky that we should have seen coming, and I was a bit kind of like, okay, I'll give this one to you. That was clever. Spent basically no money on the first 3 primaries. Put all of his money into South Carolina. Bernie Sanders actually did really well in Nevada. That was the state he did the best in, and that was the state I lived in, and so I was quite proud of that. He won Nevada almost by a landslide. But right after Nevada was South Carolina, and Joe Biden knew that out of the first 4 primaries, that was the one he had the best chance in, because there's a lot of black voters, and black voters tended to like Joe Biden. And so what he did is he put all of his money into South Carolina, and of course he won that primary very, very comfortably. And that set him up for Super Tuesday with a decent kind of running start. But then right before Super Tuesday, he convinced Pete Buttigieg and Klobuchar and all those other guys. He convinced them all to drop out. You know who he didn't convince was Elizabeth Warren. I wonder why. I wonder if it's because Elizabeth Warren was the only other candidate who was really offering a similar message to Bernie Sanders. In my opinion, she was a redundant candidate, and I never really liked her because she smeared Bernie Sanders with that bullshit about him being a sexist. She was a snake. She ended up being her politics and her personal interests, I think, got in the way of the message. If she knew what was best for the country, she would have dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders a long time ago. Because he just had more momentum than she. He had more fans than she, and I just think it was a very self-centered move that didn't seem very responsible, didn't seem very committed to the actual message that she, you know, I believe that she believed in it. I mean, she was, I don't really have a problem with her as a senator. I just didn't like her as a presidential candidate. But she was the one person who didn't drop out before Super Tuesday. And so, you know, and that was clearly to act as a spoiler for Bernie Sanders. And it was smart. It was really smart. And Joe Biden swept. And, well, the rest is history. He just kind of pulled the rug right from under Bernie Sanders when we were all feeling a little bit confident. We were all a bit drunk on the win from Nevada, and it turns out he was 2 steps ahead of everyone else on that. So I give him credit for that. That was very clever. And you know, Buttigieg, he got a cabinet position. Kamala Harris, I think she might have dropped out a few weeks before the whole Super Tuesday incident, but still, she got a very important cabinet position as the vice president. So we saw what ended up happening for those people, and they came out all right in the end. But, you know, Trump started calling him Sleepy Joe, and it was clear to everyone that he was slowing down. But, God, it's remarkable how lucid Joe Biden was in 2020 compared to how he is now. He went through a steep, sharp mental decline in those 4 years of being president. And God, like, I think probably, you know, the lowest moment for American politics in my lifetime, even lower than Donald Trump winning that first time, was that debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in 2024, just, you know, a couple months ago or whatever. Unbelievably embarrassing on all sides. Just an embarrassment to this country's dignity. And, you know, I guess we had to reach our lowest moment where things couldn't get any worse before I think people finally started waking up and realizing that this could not continue. That this weird trap that people have sort of fallen into, we don't have to do this. We don't have to elect this guy for another 4 years for him to only get older and slower and dumber and sleepier. We can do something else. There is a safety valve here. And God, it blew my fucking mind that the Democratic establishment in this country woke up enough even to do that. Even that, I mean, that itself was an enormous shock to my system. Because I was so doomered about the whole thing. I was so hopeless about the whole thing. I had been so beaten down from all those years of it, just feeling like the Democratic establishment and the liberal media was just so out of touch and so did not care about winning, so did not care about fucking anything, that, holy shit, they're actually doing something responsible for once. It was kind of a mindfuck. And maybe we should have had a little bit of anticipation of this, because actually, from what I've heard, Joe Biden has been surprisingly one of the best presidents we've had in a really long time. And one of the most liberal presidents we've had in a really, and I'm talking the American sense of the word liberal. One of the most liberal presidents we've had in a long time. He still didn't do everything he promised to do, like the corporate tax rate, I don't think changed, even though it was cut dramatically under Donald Trump. Why couldn't you bring it back up to, I think he wanted to put it up to 28%. It's still not even close. And then he pulled out of Afghanistan, which is really, I mean, about fucking time. And then he didn't do the public option thing. That was also the fucking Obama said he was going to do the public option. He never did, never tried. Joe Biden never tried. Like that idea just went whoop, it just left the running immediately as soon as they won. But then, you know, there was a lot of stuff that he did do. Surprising amount of stuff that he did do. So I mean, overall, you know, not nearly as bad as a lot of people even thought it would be. A lot of progressives, I think, were very hopeless and thought that Joe Biden wouldn't be any better than Obama. It seems like progressives really actually did respond to Joe Biden quite a lot better than they did to Obama. Even though it's funny because Obama seemed so much more capable and intelligent, but Joe Biden actually seemed to deliver a little bit more on things that progressives were interested in. So perhaps that was a sign that things were going to get better, but it was still an enormous shock to me that this change was made. Now, Kamala Harris, I never really liked her. I did think she had some skill in the first debate she was in back in 2020. She was a little bit rocky after that. She's clearly, being vice president has really kind of I think honed her craft in a lot of ways when it comes to the politicking side of things. She seems a lot smarter now, a lot cleverer now about how she presents herself than she did in the past. And she's actually giving me some kind of Obama vibes. But you know, she's dishonest, she lies, she flip-flops, and you know, she was supporting Medicare for all, and then, oh, nope, not doing that anymore, just randomly just dropped that issue. She wanted, I mean, the big deal right now is she's kind of her feet are being held to the fire over the issue of fracking, because she wanted to ban fracking, and, oh, no, not anymore. And, you know, it wouldn't bug me so much if she were just honest about why she changed her mind, because there's a way you can spin it and still seem quite sympathetic, I think. If Kamala Harris would just be like, look, back in 2020, I said I would like to ban fracking. And that's because, yeah, fracking is problematic. It's dangerous. It pollutes the water. It's actually, you know, the aquifers that we have, these precious freshwater aquifers, we need them, especially as water is getting more scarce, and it's not good to be messing with the water supply in this way. And so back then, I felt that it was the right thing to do to ban fracking. But now I'm in a different position, with more responsibility on my hand. I have to be responsive not just to the needs of, you know, the country and the world as a whole and environmental sustainability, but also to various constituent groups who I want to trust me, and I want to be able to have faith in me, that I won't abandon them. And there are a lot of people who depend on fracking. And so if she would just be a fucking human being about it on that level and say, look, there's certain realities of the situation, like on the ground, political realities that make banning fracking a far too contentious issue to mess with in this election cycle. And so I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to attack fracking. Then that would at least be something where you could look at that and say, okay, a compromise needed to be made. And so she's making that compromise. And I think it's legitimate to sometimes compromise on principle in order to address the on-the-ground reality of what you need to do to get elected, what you need to do to, you know, you can't do everything you want to do, but in order to have the hope of doing some things, you have to make a few sacrifices. I think that would be legitimate. I think people would understand that if she approached it from that way. But the thing that bugs me about Kamala Harris is that she's so dishonest about it. And she's got that Bill Clinton thing where Bill Clinton would be, you know, someone would call him out on corruption and he would just kind of deflect in an artful way. But if you're actually paying attention to what he's saying, it's not very convincing. And I think she would be a lot more convincing if she were just a lot more honest about it. But it seems like she has a much more nefarious agenda when she's not willing to just be honest about it, when she has to be this kind of fake person. And so I really don't trust her at all. She doesn't have any of my trust. But the thing that does give me a lot more confidence in the next administration is the fact that she was smart enough to hire Tim Walz as her running mate. And Tim Walz is someone I hadn't even heard of before she selected him. But wow, I mean, I have never been this impressed by a running mate in my life. Tim Walz, that man knows how to deliver a speech. That man is on Obama level for just public relations. He is on that same tier. And unlike Obama, Tim Walz actually has a record to back up all the things that he's saying. So he can move a crowd emotionally. But then you also look at the things that he did when he was, and I guess he still is, governor of Minnesota. And wow, it's actually, he's already done everything that he wants to do on a national level, but he's done it on a state level. Incredible. And he's a real progressive, and he also got the endorsement of Jesse Ventura, which is remarkable for me. I mean, I feel like the sky is falling. Like, Jesse Ventura endorsed a Democrat? Holy shit, what kind of a world are we living in now? This is the guy who, when he was asked if someone put a gun to your head and made you vote for Obama or Mitt Romney, which would you pick? He said, I would take the bullet. And he meant it. He was serious about that. There was no sarcasm in his voice. And Jesse Ventura, what he really is, in my opinion, is he's a progressive who's also a deficit hawk. And that's something that you don't really associate with progressives. But that's the big thing that kind of marks him as unique among the progressive crowd. But he has a lot of respect for Tim Walz, because of course he was also governor of Minnesota. And he said on Crystal Kyle and Friends recently, he said that when Tim Walz won his election, the next day, Tim Walz gave Jesse Ventura a phone call, and Jesse thought that was so important because your schedule is going to be really packed the day after an election like that. And so the fact that he took time out of his busy day to give Jesse Ventura a phone call showed that he had a lot of respect for Jesse Ventura and wanted his advice and wanted his approval. And so that meant a lot to him. And I think, you know, being both Minnesota progressives, they bonded, and I think that's the kind of thing it gave Jesse Ventura kind of confidence in the Democratic ticket that he's never had before. And he was never a Democrat. He never even ran with the Democrats. He was a he was a third party candidate. But yeah, that impressed me a lot, that he even managed, Tim Walz is such a good candidate that he even managed to pull Jesse Ventura, of all people. And the whole thing, it's going topsy-turvy in a good way. It's like Joe Biden drops out, finally has some amount of sense to realize that he's too old to be president, drops out, and immediately we get like the best possible vice president pick that you could possibly get. Someone who's gonna be in the room in the White House and is gonna be able to influence the direction of the federal government in a major way, who is a true progressive. So, someone who the actually left-wing faction in American politics can fully get behind without reservation. And that felt like such a load off my shoulder. That felt like such a relief to me, finding out about that. Just it's a good sign, it's a good omen, if nothing else. And also, the media feels like they're less out of touch now than they used to be. Like, they used to have this weird combination of fear-mongering about Trump, like saying this man is an evil fascist dictator in the making, which was always very hyperbolic, I thought, and like Robert Reich, I reacted to that ridiculous video that guy made. Is Donald Trump a fascist? No, he's not a fascist. He's a lot of things, but he's not a fascist. But it was a combination of that being like, oh, Donald Trump is the big scary racist who hates brown people, and oh, be afraid of him like he's some big deal. But then they also denigrate him as like a baby. But there's this kind of like, okay, are we afraid of this guy, or are we not supposed to take him seriously? They could never make up their mind about the rhetoric, and it felt like they were just falling into the hype trap that Trump only profited off of, because he only made them look ridiculous and panicked, and made them look like they didn't know what they were doing. And not attacking him on substance, not attacking him on policy, not attacking him on the ways in which he governed like a standard neoconservative, despite all of his, claims and promises that he was going to be some nationalist. And like, so all the great ammunition they could have used against Trump, they just wasted. They didn't use it. And instead they chose to attack him on really superficial things, like, oh, he misspelled the word coffee. He like, oh, look at this, he's a whiny baby. But it's like, okay, that's not an actual criticism. I mean, it's a very superficial criticism, but what does it really mean? Meanwhile, Donald Trump was actually making substantive criticisms back then. He doesn't do that anymore. Now he's an empty-brained fucking retard. But back then, he was actually attacking them on the real issues. And I think the American people responded to that. And so it was just they were so off base, so out of touch. It was either Donald Trump is Hitler or Donald Trump is a total clown who we don't need to take seriously. But you can't marry those two concepts together. They don't go together. But now they finally figured out what Donald Trump is. And what all the Republicans are. They figured it out. They're weird. They're weird, creepy perverts. That's what they figured. And like, it's so obvious. I could have told you that fucking 8 years ago. But it took them this long, and now they finally put it together, and the media is they finally have an angle of attack. And Tim Walz is brilliantly holding that up, by the way. And it just works because it's accurate. And it describes what's going on, and what it does, I think it effortlessly and very tactfully and with class reminds us that there is a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And the difference is that the Republicans are all creepy fucking incels who want to get involved in your private life and tell you what to do and watch you while you're jerking off. Like, that's who the Republicans really are. And the difference between them and the Democrats is just the Democrats are a lot more normal and just respectable people, polite people, people who are willing to concede when they lose an election. And that's all they needed to do. So it's like, even the media is waking up. Even they're waking up now. And it's like, I can't help but at this point feel just hope for the first time in years. Actual fucking hope. It's incredible. I never thought I'd see the day. And, of course, like I said at the beginning, hope, it's a dangerous thing. But, goddamn. I mean, at least I have that. At least, hey, if all my hopes get dashed again and we're back to square one, at least I had this few months to just be happy that it, like, Atlas, if we're finally going in the right direction, at least. My one other big thing for this election, that ranked choice in Nevada. It has to happen. I have to have it. That open primary, I believe it's question 3. We won it last time by a hair. We have to win it again in order to get it in the Constitution. That's been my pet issue for my whole life, is the ranked choice vote. Even going back to when I was in middle school, really, it was that video by CGP Grey that I think it was about, like, explaining the two-party system, why we have a two-party system, something like, or it was first past the post voting explained. It was something like that, way back in like 2011 or something. But that, ever since seeing that video, I've been almost singularly focused on this issue of the ranked choice vote, and the idea, the tantalizing idea that it could come to my state if we win in this next ballot initiative. God, it really, it's nerve-wracking, especially when the Democratic machine is against it, when the 2 senators from Nevada, the 2 Democratic senators, Jackie Rosen and Catherine Cortez Masto, are against it. It's nerve-wracking, the thought that we have so much going against us, so much money going against us. There's a lot of money against that initiative, and very little for it, at least in the last election. But it still won, which I think shows that people want a choice. People care enough about having a choice that they're not letting the propaganda totally sway them. Although a lot of people were swayed, it was a close one. And so that's a big deal for me. That's something that I'm nervous about, because if we don't win this time, we're never getting it, you know, for a long time at least. But yeah, those are my thoughts about politics today. I'm surprised, I'm impressed, and I'm fascinated. I'm really fascinated in what's going on right now, in a way that I haven't been in a really long time.